My name is Andrea Pennington. I'm an integrative physician, acupuncturist, best-selling author, and international speaker. My career in broadcast and digital media spans over 20 years. As past medical director for Discovery Health Channel, I've had multiple appearances on Oprah, Dr. Oz, and CNN, and my TED Talks have reached 2.5 million people. For the last several years, I've been helping other doctors, dentists, healers, and coaches from around the world to share their messages with global audiences through personal branding, publishing, online courses, and media training. And what makes this combination unique is that I am bringing my 20 years of expertise as a professional speaker and coaching other people on their TED-style talks. So I know what it takes to craft a keynote, a TED Talk, and even workshop presentations so that you communicate your message with confidence and clarity. Hello, beautiful soul. How are you doing on this Thursday? I pray that you are doing well. Welcome. It is time for the Masterclass to begin. I am hopefully live in multiple places all at once. YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. Drop me a comment to let me know that you can hear me, you can see me, and that you are ready for this Masterclass to begin. If you don't know who I am, if you're just coming here for maybe the very first time, I am Dr. Andrea Pennington. I am the Managing Director for Make Your Mark Global, and I'm super excited to be sharing this masterclass with you. So awesome, I see that the comments are coming in. Hello, Shaf, Sandra D, Roller Girl, what's up, Trevor? So we've got the US and we've got some other folks. Andrea Medina, welcome. So glad that you guys are tuning in and glad to know that you're ready. Hey, Dahlia, wonderful. I am the Cosmos. Ooh, I love your YouTube name. Awesome. All right, so this is an exciting time for me because this particular masterclass happens to be one of the greatest pivotal moments in many of my students' lives, my mentees' lives, my authors' lives, and it's all because it started off that way for me. All right, so this is not just fluff. This literally can be transformative. So wonderful to know we've got Lena tuning in from Denmark. Let's see if I can get rid of some of these. Voila, here we go. We've got Maui DuPont in from Holland. Awesome, I love it. We've got Colombia in the house. Welcome, welcome. Very glad to have you here. And Karen Joy, very good to have you here as well. We have 2 Karen Joys in our community. How interesting is that? Wonderful to have you here. Awesome. Well, my friends, let's get right into it, shall we? Just so that you have a sense of why you are here, let's get into it. So you are tuned in to the healing power of storytelling. This masterclass is going to help you learn how to use the hero's journey to heal your past, live fully in the present, and reimagine your future. Yes, it can do all of that and so much more. So again, if you don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Andrea Pennington. I'm an integrative physician, acupuncturist. I am trained in trauma recovery. I'm also the author of the Real Self-Love Handbook and founder of the Real Self-Love Movement and creator of the Attunement Meditation, just to give you a sense of who you're working with, as we might say. So my goal really with this masterclass today is to help 2 types of people. One is if you are, like I used to be, the walking wounded, if you are on a healing journey to heal some of your own personal drama and trauma, then you need to start telling yourself better stories. This masterclass is going to help you do that. It's going to help you change, literally, if you put it into practice, it can change the trajectory of your life. This masterclass is also for people who want to feel comfortable and confident sharing their story with other people without breaking down, so that you can inspire people. So if you are a coach, a healer, a doctor, if you are an author or an emerging speaker, you might want to be able to share your story in a way that inspires and entertains. And so if you stick around to the end of this masterclass, I'm going to share with you some resources that will help you transform your own internal narrative and map out your life using the hero's journey as a framework. And what makes this different is it's literally a combination of something called narrative or expressive therapy from the world of psychology. It's also leveraging the power of personal myths. And because I'm a nerd, we also are going to talk about some neuroscience and trauma recovery. Sound like a good place to start? Yeah? Awesome. So one of the first things that made the biggest difference in my own life was coming to understand that, first and foremost, my clients, my patients, were always telling stories to themselves. Now, I didn't know to the extent that the stories were holding my clients up. But let me just give you a little background. So back in the year 2001, I started working in my own wellness center that I founded with my mom, Dr. Abigail Pennington. And we set it up so that we could help people in a very holistic manner. Holistic meaning mind, body, soul, environment. One of the client groups that we worked with were people who were dealing with addiction and eating disorders. And for me, my training actually in eating disorders and addiction recovery started in my last year of medical school. So way back in 1999, I started acupuncture for detox. And that's when I really understood that we can do a lot of things to the physical body to help somebody recover from an illness or detox. But we have to really impact the mind. And as I got into working with the 12 steps in the recovery movement, I understand now that it's a soul, it is a spiritual solution that we need if we're really going to get rid of these compulsive challenges that many of us have. And so what I found is that the story we tell ourselves literally has the power to heal us, or it can wound us. And so if you think about it, the way that information has been passed down, since the beginning of human life, we have passed things down through the oral tradition, so speaking. We know that storytelling is the way that people would give advice. It's the way that legends were passed down throughout families. And we now know that the stories that we share in our household can actually impact future generations. So for example, one of the things that was mind-blowing to me, it was baffling, was I heard a client come in and say, I'm here for acupuncture because I have arthritis. Everyone in my family, all the women over 40 get arthritis. And I was like, that doesn't match up. Yes, there could be a hereditary component to that, but it doesn't mean that just because you turn 40 and you're female and you're in that family that you have to have it. But if we are expecting that, if that is our mindset, we can actually impact the gene expression. That's what epigenetics is all about. And so, they say that we hold the power to heal or wound with our stories. And so for me, I kind of liken it to being something like the operating system of a computer. The internal narrative that we have, the story, dictates kind of the rules, the beliefs, and the paradigms of what's possible for us in our lives and in our well-being and in our relationships. And we don't have to be limited by them, but many people are. And that was what was so frustrating to me in my medical practice, because I thought, surely you can change now. You can embrace a brighter future. But what I found is that we first had to get into the subconscious and help them rewrite the programs, even revisiting the past and looking at the past from a new perspective. And so that is part of what was fascinating to me. And one piece of that is, of course, it's helpful if you can do this with a therapist. But one of the things I realized is that talk therapy isn't a 100% cure-all, unfortunately. There are some people who will go to therapy for years and years, or they'll be in psychoanalysis for years and years, and it still doesn't seem to get down to that root of transformation. So in other words, you can understand why you're a little screwed up, but that's not necessarily enough to change what happens in your external life. And that was a very, very big revelation for me, because I thought that just having an epiphany and knowing where things came from, we should be cured, right? But here's one of the things that I recognized. When I first started looking at the power of transformation through storytelling, it was due to this lovely gentleman, James Pennebaker. James Pennebaker's work was all about what he called this emotional disclosure paradigm. And what that suggests is that the stressful events that we hold on to, especially if we hold them secret, they will create internal turmoil. But when we disclose it to someone, now it could be in a journal, just disclosing it to your diary, or you could be disclosing it to a therapist. But sometimes people filter and hold back what they say to a therapist. And so what he found is that if you would get engaged in what we call narrative therapy or expressive therapy, it could lead to improvements in your physical and psychological well-being, as well as giving people a sense of greater hope. And so James Pennebaker's work was what I started to add into my medical practice, so that as people were healing the body, they could start to vent and get out other aspects of their traumatic past. And so for me, that was a huge revelation, you could say, because I found that almost as if by magic, people could then bring into therapy a better understanding of how their limiting beliefs were still holding them back. Now, we're not saying that we can rewrite the past. The things that happened, the bad experiences we may have endured, absolutely, we're not saying that they didn't happen, and we're not giving excuses. But what we're doing is we're looking at a way where an individual can then reframe it. Because many times what happens to young people is we get an idea that we're a bad person. If something bad happened in our past, many of us will feel like it must be my fault. It must be that I'm a bad person. It must be that I am unlovable. And that's not actually true. It doesn't mean those things. But if we don't go back and reevaluate those messages, we'll always think that that is the truth. So in other words, when you can go back and look at your story and recognize that, of course, as a young child, it totally makes sense that that is what I would have picked up. Of course, I would have thought that it was my fault at that particular age. And so that's why I really love this work of narrative therapy, because what it essentially does is it puts you in the driver's seat. It allows you to become the hero, as you'll see, of your own life story. So I'm going to get ready to share something else with you very shortly. All right, so greetings, everyone. Glad that this is starting to make some sense for you. Awesome. Very good. Very happy to see that. And yes, absolutely. Kay says, the Bible states that the power of death and life are in the tongue. It is so true. And so we want to start to harness the power of self-talk, whether it's in your mouth or in your mind. We can actually do just that. All right, so when I started bringing narrative therapy into client work, I recognized that some people would then become more empowered to dictate the future. So again, we may not be able to change the past, but what if we took on a more empowering perspective and looked towards the future? Well, guess what? Lo and behold, the work of James Pennebaker, he did a lot of this in universities, Indeed, they found that people who engaged in this expressive narrative therapy had better outcomes, meaning they followed them and they saw that they had lower cases of depressive episodes. In some trials, people had decreased visits to doctors for health challenges and pain, all because they were taking control. Does that sound empowering? Yes. And yes, Andrea, you realize now why journaling has been so huge for you. In your healing. It may feel like a small step, and that's the thing. Like, I totally get it. In my own thinking, I was like, how could something so simplistic as journaling be so transformative? Well, I'm going to tell you exactly why that is. So after incorporating the work of James Pennebaker, I discovered that there are actually 3 keys to healing through storytelling. And that's what I really want you to take away from this. So first things first, that first key is recognizing that stories bypass the mind and they enter into the heart and the soul. Stories actually go into the subconscious mind as well. And so we have this sort of operating system, if you will, and just through telling stories, this is how children take on beliefs. We are natural meaning makers. So we humans actually make meaning of the world through symbols and through stories and through parables. And it's just natural. It's actually how we are wired. So we can pick up the vibe from people as they're telling stories, and it can impact us very, very deeply. And so it's important for you to know that stories can bypass the mind. They can get deep into your soul. And that's important because if you start to think about it, wouldn't it be interesting if you could use that to become the hero of your life? And so as I started reading James Pennebaker's work, it took me back to my days at university. When I was at Georgia State University, I was kind of doing almost a double minor in theater as well as chemistry. I was pre-med, but I was working at the Georgia State Campus TV as the managing director, and I was also performing in theater. And in one of our film classes, I was introduced to the work of this guy, Joseph Campbell. He wrote a book called Hero with a Thousand Faces. And what Joseph did is he evaluated stories, fables, myths, legends, films, all across time and all across cultures, and found that there is something that he called a monomyth, a single myth. And the monomyth is what we call the hero's journey. And I'm going to lead you through each of the stages of the hero's journey so that you can map it and look at your own life and see that you are, it's not a maybe. It's definitely not a maybe. You are on a heroic journey of the soul. And so when I started to look at the power that we have to tell these stories and to revise, now that's the biggest key here. When you start to look at modern researchers who do expressive therapy and narrative therapy, what we see is that we can start to take those old programs and revise our identity. Now, I don't mean fiction. I don't mean you're becoming something that you are not. What I mean is that you can, just like the superheroes in the movies, you can take the lessons and the pain from the past and use it to propel you forward. Those lessons can give you new meaning and purpose for your life that drive you forward. And so as I got deeper into this, I had the good pleasure just a couple of years ago to work with the late Judith Glaser. She is, or was, may she rest in peace, she was this amazing teacher, trainer, and author of something called CIQ, Conversational Intelligence. And what Judith taught me is that through neuroscience, looking at it from the lens of neuroscience, like why do stories penetrate so deeply into the mind? Why is it that the realm of the subconscious is so easy to be triggered through conversation, through body language, through tone of voice, through word choice? So I got to do this long workshop with Judith before she passed away, and it was so mind-boggling for me because one, I'm a performer, I'm a speaker, so I like to teach people like how to engage the audience and move people. But most importantly, it helped me understand why storytelling has been so healing for me and my patients. So I just want you to understand and recognize that one of the keys to storytelling, especially using the hero's journey, is to recognize that you're not just telling stories for entertainment, and you're not just changing your mental program, willy-nilly. You're doing it so that you can impact your subconscious mind and the energy and the world that you are interacting with. And so the second key that we need to be aware of is that stories, when shared in community, can actually provide a safe place for healing. Now, a lot of people will say, how can writing in a journal or telling a story or trying to revise my own mental program, how can that heal me? Well, it actually works, that's one. But yes, it may be true that, as I was saying, if talk therapy isn't working, if you feel like there's more that you need to process, when we share them in community, especially if it's a safe place, that can be a path toward healing. And so there are actually indigenous tribes around the world who don't have the same level of persistent trauma that we do, because they have rituals of getting together around a campfire or having a day of mourning where people can actually cry and wail and get out their emotions in a safe container. And it's one of the reasons why I facilitate our healing workshops in groups, because there's this effect that happens when you see another person sharing. Even if you don't have the exact same trauma, you move forward as well in your healing journey. You get to experience some of that transformation that they go through. And for me, that really showed up very strongly with this guy, Rob Goddard. One of our luminaries from my Global Luminary Academy is Rob Goddard, who, by the grace of God, he is alive and kicking. Rob actually was dealing with depression. After the crash in 2008, he really went through a serious low. And he went to a doctor. He asked for support. They asked if he was suicidal, and he admitted to being suicidal. And the doctor gave him a prescription for antidepressants and said, okay, someone's going to call you from the suicide helpline. They never called. He took the antidepressants, but they didn't have an effect. And after a couple of years of living with that, he was completely just at rock bottom. Instead of using the pills, he started stockpiling them to potentially commit suicide. And he was medicating with vodka. So here's a guy who lost his career, lost his money, was estranged from his children, lost his wife, he lost his reputation, basically lost everything. And then in 2010, he went to Dubai trying to find a fresh start. And when that didn't work, he decided he was going to jump off of the world's highest tower, which is the Burj Khalifa. Now, I've told you he's alive and kicking, and I went with Rob to Dubai to shoot for our documentary film. And one of the things that so impressed me about him is his willingness to share. Because I won't tell you how he got out of that situation. It's in his book, Suicide to Success. But he came to the south of France, where we host a workshop called Stories with Soul. And he shared exactly what he went through. And there was not a dry eye in the room. And the people who felt seen and heard, who'd maybe not been suicidal, but they had that same feeling of hopelessness, they got hope from hearing him. And so it's one of those things that I want you to be aware of, that healing in community, finding that safe space, it's one of the reasons why the 12-step tradition works so wonderfully, because we recover in community. So bear in mind that if you're looking for a safe place to be able to share your story so that you can heal and be a part of others' healing, then stick around because I will definitely share ways that you can do that. Now, the third key to really healing through storytelling is recognizing that as you transform, you can inspire others to heal and transform. Now, a lot of people will say to me, like, if I actually do transform and stop being the victim, stop being the people pleaser, stop being the go-to for everyone to dump on because I'm always in self-sacrifice, then what will happen to those people? What will happen to my friends and my family? There are many people who tell me that their friends and family don't want them to change. Their friends and family would get very upset, and that fear of rejection is huge. And others will say that it's the fear of judgment, of losing their professional standing, if you will. But what actually happens, it happened with Rob, it happened with me, it also happened with this beautiful woman, Joana Soares from Portugal. As she came into our book, Time to Rise, she shared her story of overcoming an eating disorder. And even though she was afraid that what would her friends think, people who didn't even know what she went through, what happened was people started to pour out love, and other people raised their hand like, oh my God, I went through that too. And so when we take on the courage to share our story so that we can heal and move beyond it, so that we don't have to be trapped by it anymore, it can actually inspire other people. It can inspire people that we didn't even ever think would change to change. And for me, one of the biggest fears that I had before coming out with that first TED Talk was I was afraid that people would think I was not credible if I admitted to having depression and anxiety. And now that we've seen, such beautiful documentary filmmaking or television with Oprah interviewing Meghan and Harry and them admitting the struggles, the thing is that it can inspire other people to heal. And in my case, one of the things that for me was so beautiful was, some of you know, my mother has dementia. And a few years ago, she had about a 15-minute window or 20 minutes where she could still have enough short-term memory. And I pulled out my laptop and I showed her this TED Talk. And she was kind of nodding, listening. And when it was over, she said to me, Andrea, I can tell you're doing the master's work. My mom, with her Catholic upbringing, really believes that God's work for us, we each have our own divine plan that we're supposed to live out. And she said that. She said, I know that you're doing the master's work. And this was a moment when my mom said to me that she believed that she was ready to go. And that if she met her maker, he would say, job well done. So even though I was so afraid that she would hear this TED Talk where I was talking about how my mother influenced this sense of, low self-worth and the hiding and the imposter syndrome, my healing and coming out with that story actually allowed her to give me her blessing and to tell me that she believed that I'm doing the master's work. And I believe that as well. So these three keys are really what can lead to personal fulfillment and personal healing. And so I don't want you to think that it's trivial, because it's not. You getting to a place where you love and accept yourself and where you're willing and ready to go beyond the paradigms of the past, that's huge. Yeah? So I'm going to just quickly check and see if there are any questions before we move into going through the hero's journey, because I know that that is part of what everybody is excited about. Yeah? So, awesome. All right. Olivia, so you were introduced to me through my TED Talk. Awesome. Yes. Well, it has been a really wonderful experience for me, that TED Talk. I've shared this before. I didn't know that this was going to happen. I wanted to come clean when I had this calling to get back out on stage. I needed to rebrand myself so that people would know me for who I really am. So I had no idea that sharing my story like that was going to create a whole new aspect of my life and give new meaning and purpose to my life. But it has. And I'm just in awe and so grateful. So shall we move now into looking at the hero's journey? Are you super excited? Are you curious to see the stages of the hero's journey? Is that a yes? All right, well, I'm gonna bring it on, as they say. All right. So, here we go. So the hero's journey is really broken down into 4 main stages, all right? The first stage is what we call the call to adventure. Stage 2 is the initiation. 3 is transformation, and 4 is the hero's return. So I'm first going to give you an example that 9 people out of 10 can totally understand, and then I'll give you an example from my own life. And the example I'm talking about is actually Cinderella. See, what you will come to understand is when Joseph Campbell figured out this monomyth, this hero's journey, people in TV and film jumped on it and studied it. In fact, George Lucas studied it to a T. So all of the Star Wars movies follow this monomyth structure. And so did Disney. All right, so let's have a look. All right, so in this call to adventure, we start off with our hero in the ordinary world. So the ordinary world is when you have kind of a limited understanding of your problem, or you don't have an idea of a solution. So in the world of Cinderella, when she was a little girl, she was beloved by all. Her father just adored her, but unfortunately, her father died. And the evil stepmother and the stepsisters just made her clean. You know, she was just basically a handmaid. So that's the hero in their quote-unquote ordinary world. The next thing that we experience in this first phase is what we call the call to adventure. So this is where there's a need for change. And in this case, our hero hears that there's a ball. So she wanted to go to the ball, and so she goes to her evil stepmother and says, "Can I please go if I finish all the cleaning and all the dusting and all of the stuff and the sewing? Can I go?" There was this call to take her out of her ordinary, miserable life. Now, the evil stepmother says yes, but unfortunately, one of the other things that happens in this first phase is a refusal. In this case, it was actually the evil stepmother who was shutting down the call. You'll see in other movies that the refusal of the call, and you've probably seen it in your own life, is someone says to you, "Oh, you should write a book." And you're like, no, who, me? No, who would want to read? No. You know, that's the refusal of the call. In other movies, you literally see it, like Neo in The Matrix, which I'll be talking about next week in our other masterclass. So that's stage 1 of, or part 1 of the hero's journey. So when we move into the initiation, it starts off with the meeting of a mentor. Because for most of us, we need some sort of supernatural help or a mentor to really get us out of our comfort zone. So in the case of Cinderella, she meets her fairy godmother. And this helps her to overcome her fear and any other negative emotions that she had. The next thing is the crossing of the threshold. This is when our hero commits to change. And in this case, she's transformed, she looks like this amazing princess, and she's ready to go to the ball. Absolutely stunning, right? And then the last part of the initiation is when the hero has left the ordinary world, they're out in this new realm, this new activity or experience. They meet some allies and some enemies. They go through some tests, And in this case, with Cinderella, she's at the ball and she's trying to fit in. She's not allowed to tell anyone that she's been transformed by this fairy godmother. And there are enemies, there are all these people at the ball jealous because the prince goes for her. All right? So that is the end of part 2 of the hero's journey. And then as we move into the transformation phase, in the language of the monomyth, they call it the approach to the innermost cave. And you'll see that in movies and novels. In this case, with Cinderella, her approach was going back into the ordinary kind of humdrum life, but she had to escape by midnight. And so she's preparing for this major change, meaning she had to go back and before anybody could find out that, her carriage was going to be converted into a pumpkin. But unfortunately, or fortunately, she loses one of her glass slippers. Then we move into the phase of an ordeal, death, and rebirth. And this, in most stories, is when there's like a major battle that someone has gotten ready for. In this case, the major battle was keeping her mouth shut back home when everyone was talking about they're going to find out who this little slipper fits on. That was the major ordeal in her world. And as we move to the next phase, which is the reward, lo and behold, the slipper fits. So in the mythic language, we often call it, the taking up the sword or the elixir or the reward. And then when we move into part 4 of the hero's journey, it's what we call the road back. Unfortunately, most of us heroes do make our way back to where we began, but we're transformed. Now, I say unfortunately because some people just want to escape forever, but you, my friend, are going to return with that elixir. Now, as you'll see in most stories and movies, the road back is not smooth sailing. That would be too boring. It's as if, the author of all decided that we should have some trials and tribulations on that way back. And indeed, Cinderella had to deal with the jealous sisters and the mean stepmom. Let me get some water here. But then there's the resurrection. In the fourth, this next piece of the fourth part is the resurrection. This is when our hero goes through some final attempts, and they literally are like the phoenix rising. They are truly transformed. They get back up so that they can return fully having mastered whatever the drama or ordeal is. So that is how the hero's journey plays out in the realm of Cinderella. All right? Can you see any similarities in your own life? Let me know. And definitely stick around because I'm going to show you what we can do next is to look at your life. And I see some of my dear luminaries are here. I've asked them to create a timeline of life events. So if you've already taken my mini course on the 3 keys to becoming the hero, then you've seen this timeline of life events. And for those of you who signed up for this masterclass, when I send out the replay, I will give you the links so you have these worksheets to actually do it, and then you can map it out against the hero's journey. So we look at our life and we look at these stages. And so I'm going to share a little bit of how I discovered one phase. Now I should say this. You don't only go through the hero's journey once. You will go through the journey multiple times. So you could literally break down a section of your life or some major thing you were trying to escape or achieve, like the path to medical school or the path to getting an MBA, or it could be the path to your wedding. There could have been a whole host of things that you were on a heroic journey, right? Thank you. Yes, that was the quick version of the hero's journey. I teach Stories with Soul, which is a 2-day workshop where we really go deep. It's one of the beautiful things that Joseph Campbell did is he really brought to the forefront all the different characters and archetypes that are generally involved. So not just the boring villain like the evil stepmother, but there's so many other archetypes. So anyway, so I'm now going to walk you through it with a little more detail. And you tell me if you can recognize any of these particular stages. So for me, I'm going to share a little bit. Now, we talk about how in the very beginning, got notes here, in the very beginning, our hero is in what we call the ordinary world. And in that ordinary world, they don't have much of awareness of what their problem is. Or sometimes they do know what their problem is, but they don't see a solution. So here's what the situation was for me. So back in the early 2000s, when I was the medical director and spokesperson for Discovery Health Channel, I was doing TV, and then I built the wellness center that I told you about. And I was, I grew up being a good girl. I wanted to keep my dad's approval and attention, so I was the good girl. I was a people pleaser. I played by the book. And that was not really a great way to live. But when I got to the height of my medical career, I was hosting TV shows on Discovery. I was anchoring the news every day. I was on TV. And people were starting to recognize me on the street, but they thought that I was that same buttoned up, boring doctor lady. And I was starting to feel so anxious and so dissatisfied with my life that I didn't even want my life anymore. And one of the things that happened was I got this opportunity. Some of you already know a lot happened. I'll save that for another masterclass. But I ended up going on a vacation to the south of France, and I literally gave up everything to the divine in desperation. But one of the things that happened when I came back and I realized that I had this calling on my life to live differently. I had this awareness that I needed to change. I could not keep doing what I was doing on television, because there came a moment when I wanted to tell people all that I was learning about mind-body medicine, about the power of mindfulness, acupuncture, nutrition, all these things that you know today, we discovered many, many years ago, over decades ago, but they weren't ready. And I felt like I can't live a lie anymore. I can't, be helping people in my medical center and then the rest of the world doesn't get access to it. And so I knew that I had to change. And the interesting thing was I got an offer to do a TV special. And at first I was like, okay, let me put on my good thinking hat and figure out, something inspirational and motivational, because I was being given an opportunity to produce it for a different TV network. And at first I thought, okay, well, I know how to do this. I'm just going to do what I always do. I'm going to put on that good face and tell these stories. But it turned out that I got pregnant before we started shooting. And the producers asked if they could cover my pregnancy. And at the time I thought, wow, that's actually quite unique. That'll be a great documentary reality series. And so I said yes. I said yes. And I happened to meet someone who did something called hypnobirthing. So hypnobirthing is helping a woman, couple, family, but a woman can actually go through this hypnosis process and all this breathing to deliver a baby without anesthesia, without the epidural. And, at the beginning of my pregnancy, I went to the regular doctors. I was, again, kind of in the box still. I was just stepping over that threshold. But when I went to this hypnobirthing course, I realized, whoa, we've been fed a lie, all these stories and seeing people screaming and, needing all this help. Well, there are other ways to deliver. Anyway, so I met this mentor. I ended up doing the hypnobirthing course, and it was just a radical change for me. But one of the other things that happened was I met this woman named Angela, who does past life regression and other hypnosis stuff. And she, for my TV show, I was really committed to going into the land of woo-woo at this point. She agreed to come on my show and do a guided session so that I could connect with the soul of my baby while I was pregnant. Yep. So I did this. This was, that stage of being in this new environment with allies and tests. But it was so transformational for me that I knew that this was my new way of being. So I ended up going to a birth center, so not a hospital, which was a complete departure from what I thought. So I went to this birth center where they had midwives. I'm doing the hypnobirthing thing, had my hypnobirthing coach. My father flew in, like everyone is there. We're all, preparing for this major, major change. And lo and behold, the big ordeal happened. About 12 hours into labor, we realized my daughter's head was she was not descending. So I knew that as much as I didn't want to have to go to the hospital, I knew that it was a life and death situation. And so we did. I ended up, and you can see it in the docu-series, which is on Gaia, believe it or not. We went to the hospital, and yes, I did have assisted delivery with this lovely pediatrician who delivered my daughter. That was the major reward. But what was interesting is that as I started getting feedback from people who had seen me for years on television as that old Dr. Andrea, what they saw in this new series was they saw the real me. And instead of them judging me for being, weird and woo-woo, or, complaining about the back pain and seeing all of the other stuff that they saw, I recognized that I could just be myself. So if you can just imagine coming out of all that perfectionism and people-pleasing and trying to fit in to having this complete transformation where I was being recognized for who I really am and being invited to now speak on stages, to do other TV shows, no longer as that old version of me, but as the new version of me. And so all of the lessons that I learned and the transformation that I learned allowed me to move forward. It ultimately allowed me to leave America and move to the south of France. And it is truly here, I believe, where I've had my resurrection. By letting go of the media and all of those expectations and really doing more of that woo-woo deep dive into the soul, I realized that this is who I really am. I've always been fascinated with spirituality and mind-body stuff. I've always wanted to be amongst superheroes. And so here in the south of France is when I really had this sort of resurrection. And it's what allowed me to ultimately do that TED Talk back in 2014. That's now got 2.7 million views. So the transformation that I experienced was just mind-blowing. So much so that in 2019, when I was invited to give a TED Talk in Peterborough, many of you have seen it, I got up on stage and I sang. I mean, it doesn't get any more vulnerable than actually sharing your truth, your voice. Speaking is one thing, but singing for me has always been a whole other thing. So are you getting a sense in your own life of how you are on a hero's journey as well? So I mentioned that if you signed up for this, you will get links to download what I call the timeline of life events and instructions on how you can map yourself with the hero's journey. All right, but first I'm going to have a look at questions. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat. The lovely Lena Nielsen, creating a timeline of life events and writing your story has been such a powerful experience and an opportunity to see your life in a new way and to heal. And the lovely Lena is an author in this book over here, Manifesting Love. So grateful that you are here today. And if I can just tell a little bit, I mean, Lena has also talked about how this experience of sharing her story in this book and 2 other chapters that she wrote in other books, like Lena, if I'm getting it right, you said that this has given you a new way to attract other people, that other people will be attracted at the way you are able to stand so powerfully in your new heroic life expression as an artist, as a facilitator, as the creator of the onboarding compass. And that is going to attract the people that you can serve in such a beautiful way. If you'd like to know how you can use the hero's journey for coaches and healers and speakers, that is next Thursday. Next week, I'm doing another masterclass, same concept, but different stories. So please do tune in then. All right, so Macarena, lovely to see you again. How is the hero's journey, which seems more future-oriented, how can that help us heal the past? All right, well, what we can do is let me just show you. Let me show you. And TG, I'll also explain this as an outline to write one story. So here's what we do. You'll get this when you get the replay links. You create a timeline of life events. The first thing we do is just sort of list the specific events in your life. Specific meaning significant. Anything that was significant to you. You don't have to do it on this type of a page. You can just do it as a Word document, but you generally want to track. And there's different ways you can do it. You can look at significant periods of time. So what I start people off with is looking at life chapters. So if your life is a book and you were to break it into chapters, you might start from birth to maybe the time you went to, I don't know, elementary school or something. So here's an example of my life chapters. First, what we did is I looked at from birth to age 3, because for me that was a significant life chapter, because that was when my parents were still married and we lived in Nevada. Then I listed primary school, because we were now living in Colorado, and there was very specific things that happened when I was in primary school. I won't get into all the details, but I'm just breaking down the chapters. Then there was middle school and high school, my time at university, the time I spent in med school, and my first career. So you can also do this. You can create chapters of your life and then take the timeline and write down anything significant that happened in that chapter. Make sense? You could also choose to do it as categories. So if it's a category of your life chapter, it could be, in my case, the time that after my parents were divorced. There, I can definitely see a big line between pre-divorce and after divorce and events that happened that I could list. The period of time in my life that I lived with depression. It was a pretty long period of time. And so I can look at that, just that section of my life, and list all of the major events that happened there. The time that I had that spiritual awakening here in the south of France. From that point up until I moved to France, that was a significant chapter of my life. I've now been in France for 10 years. That's a chapter of my life. Going global started about 6 years ago. That's a chapter of my life, particularly with my business. So do you see, you're going to use this timeline of life events, and then you can start to do some writing. The first thing you do is you list the significant events, whether they were highs or lows or turning points in your life. Identify if there were any characters or people. And again, you know, the force of depression, in my case, could be like a character in my life story. As you're taking notes, you describe the meaning, the lessons, the beliefs that you took on. So when you were asking this question, Macarena, about orienting us towards the future, well, if you go back into your timeline, and in my case, I can identify, you know, the years of my life that I lived with depression, and I thought that that was what I was stuck with. I mean, that's why, in my case, I had suicidal thoughts, because I thought there was no better future. And that is a belief that you can identify in your timeline that needs to change. When I went back into my timeline and identified exactly why and how, sorry, I guess you can't read this. I had to identify why and how I took on this belief that I'm not worthy of love unless I'm doing something. This very achievement-oriented, looking for validation, looking for approval. Now, I knew that I had been programmed that way from my dad, always stressing education. But by doing this timeline of life events and doing this process, you can start to go in and have a conversation with the inner you. When I had a conversation with my inner child with one of these guided meditation sessions, it allowed me to have a conversation to let her know that I know you feel like doing all this overachievement stuff and putting yourself last is going to somehow win daddy's love. But the reality is, we're grown up, daddy already loves us, and all of that exhaustion, overwork and exhaustion, it's got to go. And as some of you know, I lead a guided meditation every month in our Real Self-Love movement. You can also assure your inner child that you want to shift. And so one of the things that happened in my own recovery journey, to your point about going towards the future, was there are aspects of my personality that I've taken on that are not all bad, even though the perfectionism can lead to a lot of overwork and exhaustion, and in my case it led to burnout, and I never felt like I was good enough. I've been able to reframe that and now say, and like the work I'm doing now, I'm raising investment money for a new health platform. And that ability to look at data and to make a good argument and to find all the facts and present a good case to decrease the fear of a potential investor, well, that's the positive side. So in the hero's journey, heroes have a turning point moment. If we look at, let's say, Spider-Man, there's one moment where he loses his uncle, and he could have just gone the negative route and just been angry, pissed off, and become vengeful after the spider bite. But instead, he took the path of kind of crazy vigilante justice, but working on the positive. And so we have that same opportunity. When you go back and you identify that there was a moment in time, and I understand some people have had longer periods of abuse or neglect, but when you recognize that even if it was a period of time, say 3-5 years, you might recognize that you took on beliefs about yourself and what's possible, and now you're just living out a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when you go back to those beliefs and you reckon with your inner child and say, you know what, all of those things did happen, but now let's take these lessons and use them for good. So one of the things that has happened in my life, I remember confessing to an audience that my dad once told me. This was again at the height of my career. I'd been on Oprah, had the books, multi-million-dollar business, all of the things. And he said, can't you just get a job at a hospital? And my mind was like, that was an epiphany for me. I woke up to realizing I will never be able to please him because I'm not willing to play in that paradigm, the paradigm of get a job, work for someone else with a pension. I'm a creator. I'm an entrepreneur. And so that awakening hit me, and I happened to share it with a group of clients. And this woman just shook her head, and I was like, what's up? She was like, if you had done that, you wouldn't be here for me. And this is a woman who had been through so many programs for binge eating disorder. And she, with tears in her eyes, said she's so grateful that I didn't. And so I'm now able to use the negative stuff from the past in a positive way. And I can take it and now create a future where I don't carry any heaviness about that anymore. My dad and I are on great terms, and he said that he's proud of me. And that's why I was saying in key number 3, other people will be inspired to heal when you embrace your authentic self and live your truth. I hope that answered your question, Macarena. All right, let's see if there are other questions. And then I'll get back to steps of the writing process. So Callie, you say that you can see you've had many hero's journeys, and now it's time for a new one. Awesome, using the tools. The past ones happened unconsciously, and the next hero's journey that you're on, you will have more awareness. Yes, and that is exactly what this is about. Most of the things that we've experienced were unconscious. We didn't choose to become people pleasers. I mean, maybe you can remember that if you happen to grow up in a family where there was an alcoholic or someone abusive, you might have learned to just be quiet, downplay, like hide. But for most of the other things, even when you've escaped that situation, you're still making a choice to keep living it, but it's unconscious. And so now what we're doing is, God willing, we're bringing more consciousness into this so that we can heal the past, not run from it, not pretend that it didn't happen, but to use it as fuel to move forward. Make sense? All right, so Sandra D asks, is it impossible that you're an empath? And when I was depressed, so you're asking me, and when I was depressed, I was actually absorbing someone else's emotional sludge. Yes, absolutely. In my case, Sandra, because I grew up in a household where my mother said, children are to be seen, not heard, my mouth was always zipped and locked, and I could only just sit and observe. I think that experiencing that, it's not a functional kind of family environment to be in. A lot of people who have experienced dysfunctional families, it tweaks the nervous system. So whether I was born an empath or I was molded into one, I definitely could pick up on other people's energy. But that was not just the reason for my depression. I can say now that a lot of my depression was being disconnected from my authentic self. Because I had been so silenced and put into boxes and always trying to fit in, I lost a connection with my soul. But I knew that connection existed. I believed, even before becoming very spiritual, I just believed that we came from spirit, and that's home. And so I think my depression was more about being homesick and about being disconnected from my authentic self. So Olivia says, the journey is so enlightening when we tell the story. Unfortunately, we don't usually do this when we're going through it. Yeah, well, that's true. As my mother used to always say, your destiny is best observed in the rearview mirror. Like hindsight is 20/20. But that's about when we're being unconscious. And that is, again, why I'm inviting us all to be more conscious and move forward. Yeah? All right, so no other questions. All right, I'm glad to know that my story inspires. So I'm going to take you back to this information you'll get when you get the worksheet. So basically what we do is we identify specific or significant moments in time that have marked us with certain beliefs or actions. And then we figure out which ones of these do we need to change? What is the future impact of continually living that way? What would a superhero do? If you were going to activate your inner superhero, identify which of those elements need to be changed or processed or healed. And then what I invite you to do is write a story. Now, in the free class that I have for you, the 3 keys to becoming the hero of your life, you're invited to write several different types of stories. One of them is a peak experience. You could also write about a low point. That's what James Pennebaker's work was initially. It was all about writing about low points, and that was causing transformation in and of itself. And then I invite you to create a personal success mantra based on the lessons that you've learned that motivate you to live in a new way. All right? So then when you've done this, then you can start to look at the hero's journey and kind of identify, oh, that time when I was, away at camp and this happened, or whatever. You'll be able to look at your life and see which of these stages you've been on and what was the outcome. And if you were going to become the hero and take those lessons and turn them into blessings instead of just pain, what would that look like for you? So as I mentioned, much of this you can find in the 3 keys to becoming the hero of your life. It's a much shorter version. And if you would like a slightly longer version, in fact, it's a 6-week version, I am hosting Stories with Soul. It is a 6-week life writing workshop that happens virtually. Normally it happens here in France, but COVID. So starting on March 20th, that's next Saturday, and for 6 weeks, we will be doing this live storytelling and therapeutic workshop. So included in Stories with Soul is 2 days of live training with me. We have group feedback sessions so that you can share your story, get feedback, and hear other people as they're going through their healing. It also includes 10 guided meditations so that you can get into the right mental state, and a workbook. And the total value of that course alone is $2,696. Don't worry, I never charge that much money for my stuff. We also have bonus gifts for you, 6 digital books and an audiobook. So many of the beautiful stories that I've shared about some of our amazing luminaries who have taken up the pen and put on their cape and come out of hiding are in these books, and we're including those as bonuses. So those bonus gifts are part of the Stories with Soul workshop. And I also have a media success course that is a bonus. So if you are a coach or a healer or a speaker, I want you to, once you're sufficiently confident that you've healed enough, if you wanted to go on TV or a podcast or something, Media Success will show you how to take your story to the media. And for the first 10 people who sign up, I'm offering a private session with me. And the total bonus value for this 6-week workshop is $670. So, of course, you're not going to be paying this total value, which is $3,000. In fact, Stories with Soul is just $530, and it is open as of now. But you're not even going to pay $530. If you are quick and clever, you can pay $350 if you get in by March 19th. You'll get all of the bonuses, all of the good stuff, and the first 10 people who sign up will get a session with me. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, I think so. And people who have been through Stories with Soul all have such amazing feedback on it. So if this is of interest to you, you just go to andreapennington.com. If you're watching on the replay, the links will be in the description or in the comments section, and you can enroll in Stories with Soul. We start next week. So it's a very intimate way in a private sessions on Zoom and private sessions with me if you're one of the first 10 who signs up. You will be able to go through this process and really get some healing. And I'm just really grateful to all the people who have given us testimonials. You'll see them when you go to the link that's on my website. All right? So what questions do you have? And so Kathy asks, you feel helpless when facing the problem. I want to have the ability to master the problem. How long does it take to follow the hero's journey? Well, I wish I had a magic number for you, Kathy. Everyone is a little bit different. For some people who, my work in recovery comes from the world of addiction. You know, people can literally get past some of the worst traumas that have led to addictive behavior in just 3 months, if you look at the recovery model. So it can take a longer time or a shorter time, but the most important thing is getting on the journey. If you do find that it is uncomfortable to face the problems alone, I highly recommend, especially if there's any trauma, to work with a coach or a therapist so that you're in a safe space. Our Stories with Soul is not considered therapy. It is therapeutic, but it's not therapy. So if you find that you're really, coming up against stuff, then having a private relationship with a therapist might be best for you. TG, has my connection with authentic self and intuition become very clear as I've grown in the hero's journey? And may I ask, do you often experience certainty? Progress, not perfection. Absolutely. For me, I was just talking to one of our dear luminaries, Dr. Karina, who's coming out on her own heroic journey. One of the things that this whole hero's journey has done for me, I have been meditating since university days, mainly to manage kind of this ADD kind of brain that I had then, always having ideas and stuff. But since I've really embraced who I am, and that turning point for me, coming to the south of France, having an out-of-body near-death experience, and having direct contact with the divine definitely heightened all of my sensitivities. You may hear about some of this in this documentary that I'm working on, but I have since traveled the world working with shamans and curandera and other mystical support beings to develop my intuition. And the number one thing for me that has worked has been daily meditation. Absolutely. Without a doubt. It has, I can't say that I'm 100% perfect with my intuition, but yes, I pick up on things long before they ever happen. There's a downside to it too, I will admit, being an empath and I can pick up things that are not even in the same country or the same hemisphere. But I don't know if that's really answering your question. But it definitely has allowed me to, recognizing that I'm a hero on this journey in communion with the divine, like my higher power is really the director. And when I tune in through meditation, I get guidance. And I think that's why my intuition can be so strong and my visionary skills. So I try my best to keep out of the perfectionistic side of the past. Thank you, Donna. Yes, you did Stories with Soul. So glad that you enjoyed it too. All right, so Stephanie, could I do this exercise of storytelling with the help of a close friend? For example, instead of writing, could I tell my story and then write while you've recorded it? Yeah, you could absolutely do that. If there's someone that you trust and you could feel like you can just get it out, absolutely. And you'll see in the Real Self-Love Handbook, I often invite people to just record one of their sessions. So we talk about doing this two-chair technique, where you could imagine having your inner child, your younger self in one chair, and you, the adult self or the compassionate self, in another chair. But you could definitely record it and then have it transcribed or write it. But if speaking it, and that's why we do Stories with Soul over 6 weeks. Before it was just a 2-day workshop here in France. Now it's those 2 days plus 3 follow-ups. Speaking your story in a safe place and hearing other people as they're healing, it's like medicine for the soul. And so yes, if you have someone close to you that you feel confident enough to share, absolutely do it. And and then use all of the other tools that I'm sure you're already connected with, whether it's breath work, meditation, tapping, to get the stress response back down. That's one of the reasons why we include so many guided meditations in my programs, so that you can get into a brainwave state where you can calm down. All right, so I hope that this has been helpful for you, and I do hope that you will join us next week if you happen to be a speaker, a healer, a coach, and you want to use storytelling to inspire and to influence. That is what the focus will be on. So rather than your personal healing, it will be about transformation. So I do hope that you'll join me next week for that. Are there any other questions? Anything else you want to ask or add? I'm so grateful that you all have been here and that this is, have a lot of people watching simultaneously on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. And if you are watching the replay, then please drop a comment below with #replay and we will give you some love as well. All right, Sandra D, you have a question about the workbook. Do I print it? So we do not print the workbook. If you were here in France, we would give you a hard copy. We haven't, I guess we could, but since class starts next Saturday, I don't know that it would get to you in time. mail here in France has been a little bit slow, but you can print it yourself. All right? Thank you, Stephanie, for the virtual hug. Thank you all for being here. Any other questions? So a lot of people have asked me, again, some of those things were like, what if my family were to pick up this book or see me sharing this story? Remember that we don't advise you to share anything unless and until you've personally gotten to a place of healing where it's safe for you, so that you're not going to have a meltdown. And for your family members, I don't share every detail of my life. I know y'all may think, gosh, she's so open. I don't share all of it. My parents are still living. I've got family who watches these shows. But you can get to a point where you can share a little bit in a way that allows you to own your truth. And I think one of the biggest advantages of Stories with Soul and storytelling with the hero's journey is that you will find your voice. You will find your authentic, true voice. And over time, what I find is it's repetition. It's being willing to show up for yourself. Because if you remember on that hero's journey, just because the mentor, in my case me, just because the mentor arrives and helps you cross the threshold doesn't mean you're done. There's going to be tests and trials. They don't all have to be bad, though. Those tests and trials can be just you practicing, asserting yourself, establishing boundaries, confronting people when that needs to, right? Yeah, so I get it. No, it is not every Saturday. So Stories with Soul starts next week. It's Saturday and Sunday. And then the following 3 sessions are indeed on Saturdays. Yes. And Susanna, you're afraid to do the 5th step. Then, my friend, you might want to do it with someone. If you've got fear coming up, do it with someone that you trust. But I can say, just as you saw the information about Rob Goddard, he shared something that for men, granted things are changing, but for most men, there's a huge stigma about admitting that you've had a problem with your mental health. And the biggest breakthrough for him came when he finally admitted it. And he admitted it to just one person. So before the book, before going on stages, before doing, he was on BBC Radio with his story, with his book. It started with one person. And so finding that one confidant, whether it's me, whether it's our group, whether it's a person in your family, that one confidant can be the one that helps you step over that threshold. And then you take it from there. At what times are the Saturday classes? So Stories with Soul will be at 8 a.m. Yeah, 8 a.m. Pacific. Saturday and Sunday, we will be together for 4 hours with breaks for food and drink. Everyone will have an opportunity to share. I've only given you a taste of the hero's journey, but I will take you through all of the 17 stages of the hero's journey that I didn't share today, as well as all of the archetypes. And for those of you who are speakers or want to get on TV or other things, there'll also be some of the neuroscience about storytelling, which is useful for us, but it's also useful if you want to consciously inspire. I was going to say influence. You're not going to use these superpowers for evil, but once you understand the neuroscience of how we develop rapport with people, how we draw them into our world, how we can touch their heart and stir their soul, that's all that conversational intelligence and the archetype stuff and language that I go into in depth in Stories with Soul. So it's a fun thing. So it seems that this relates to personal branding in a big way. I'm just now gaining a clear understanding of this. Yeah, this can be part of your personal branding. I didn't intend to be so out there with my business as a personal brand. I started off very hidden, wearing masks as a TV presenter. But over the course of time, I've found that when people come to me and they say, I want to get on TV, I tell them specifically what not to do. Do not make a fake personal brand because it's not sustainable. It may get you some success, but it's not sustainable success. And in my case, I was on Clubhouse last night with the amazing Taz Thornton and Claire Brumby and some other folks. And we were talking about this idea of authenticity. Like a lot of people have abused this concept of authenticity. But in my world, sharing your personal story, not in a slimy way to try to get pity or sympathy or that, but sharing it from a place of power. That's why I teach this hero's journey. You're not doing this just to get people to relate to you. It's about coming from a place of power so that you inspire other people to either transform or to work with you. And so it is a big part of your brand. And I think right now we're seeing that the world is calling for more personal connection. So back in the day, you could just have a slick website and a cute logo and flash a smile and people would say, oh, you're a coach, you're this, you're that, great. But now people can want to see what's behind that. They want to know what's the heart and the soul behind the message and the slick website. And so this idea about becoming an authentic personal brand by sharing your truth is 100% of what I do at Make Your Mark Global. All right, Stephanie has another question. How could I make known the real me? I mean, how could I make my family and friends understand that I am different? Somehow I feel stuck when they expect me to be the same way always. It's going to take practice, Stephanie. I don't know if you already have the Real Self-Love Handbook, but I talk about that a lot in my own story and how we can do it. Over time, people will just have to see that you stay consistent. And so I mentioned that a lot of people fear that if I become my authentic self, what happens to the family members? Well, it's going to take practice. Every time you have a conversation, when you go home for family visits, you're going to have to step in as your authentic self and resist going back into those roles of, oh, you're just the kid's sister or you're the whatever. It's going to take practice. And you may have to set some boundaries that say, you can't speak to me like that anymore. And no, I'm not going to do that. And no, I'm not going to take that on. And over time, people will see the real you. Now, I can definitely say that in my case, when I decided to leave the traditional practice of medicine, and when I decided to leave America and come here to France, not all of my family was into it. And in particular, my dad was not super happy with that choice. And he made it known. But I stood my ground. And over time, he's come to see that even though I don't live in his paradigm of safety, I am safe. I am well. We're thriving. So it takes that consistent effort on our part to show up as our authentic self. Yeah? In the Stories with Soul workshop, would these be the kind of stories one could use to write a memoir? Absolutely. And I would say, if you're not already coming next week, Dahlia, definitely come to the transformative power of storytelling. I'm running a similar workshop, but aimed at people who want to write or speak or use this in branding. But absolutely, what Stories with Soul will help you do is, one, map out your memoir, but two, also make sure that you're telling a story that takes the reader on a journey, that really draws them in. It's a beautiful, beautiful way of doing it. It's what I have been teaching now for several years, and all of those books that I showed you, those authors have been doing it as well, getting their own TED Talks, their own shows, and publishing their own books. So absolutely, you can use it for that. And Susanna, yes, you are welcome. All right. So absolutely, if you are not able to join us live, of course, all of the videos in Stories with Soul you can access at any time. So you can watch the replay, And yeah. Roller Girl, how do I stay focused and remember what you're reading when you study text? Ooh, well, I am a very big kinesthetic and color person. So visual and kinesthetics. So visual, I do a lot of coloring, color coding things when I have to memorize stuff. I also organize things spatially when I used to like studying pharmacology, for example. Um, that's a big thing for me. And I'm a kinesthetic person. So I like to listen to lectures, but I need to see because I'm visual. And I find that as I write things and write them, it really locks in. So there you go. And voila. All right. And Vanessa, beautiful soul, sending you so much love from France. And yes, you're going to be here one of these days. Standing your ground is key. And it's also the hardest part because we get so used to people pleasing. I know, I've been there, done that. But the good news is it is possible. Recovery is possible. And yes, people can change. Reminds me of the old John Legend and Snoop Dogg. I can change. People can change. Like I never would have thought my dad would come around because in his generation, like that was the truth. You work, you get a job, you get a pension, that's your security. You know, and so me living in a foreign country with, you know, his granddaughter, like, wait, what? But people can change. We can change. Absolutely. So yes, vulnerability, authenticity, sustainability, and impact. Yeah, those are all of the things that I look for as I'm building businesses with people or for people or when people ask me for advice. Because if you can't be your authentic self, it'll eventually fall apart on you. All right, my dear friends. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. I hope that you now have a good sense of what is possible when you take this on. I do hope that you will visit AndreaPennington.com so you can learn all about stories with soul. Sandra D, yes, I did say that if you're one of the first 10, you will get a private session with me. The one-on-one session is an hour, and I cannot tell you if you will be among the first 10 because I don't have anyone else looking at the sales as they come in. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you that just right now, but you know, you can always send me an email after you've purchased to show me exactly what time you bought. All right, so again, these are some of the bonuses that you'll get with Stories with Soul. And, you know, one more time, just going to show you all of the good stuff that you get with Stories with Soul. And thank you, Trevor. Trevor, you've been here in France when we did Stories with Soul, so you know how transformational it is. So some of the other stuff that you get, the Media Success course, private session with me for the first 10. So yeah, there you have it. The whole total value of this 6-week workshop is over $3,000. The full price for the course is $530. But if you buy it by March 19th, you can get into Stories with Soul for just $350. And again, if you're among the first 10 signups, you will get a private session with me, which is valued at my current rate of $422 per hour. All right? And there you have it, my friends. That is all I got for you this week. Next week is, it's called The Transformative Power of Storytelling. This one was called The Healing Power of Storytelling. So it was all about using the hero's journey to heal yourself. Next week, we are doing the transformative power of storytelling, meaning how can you tell stories that transform other people? So I'm going to just throw this up on screen real quick. There it is. This is next week's masterclass. It is the transformative power of storytelling. So I'm going to show you how to use the hero's journey to share your own story, whether that's on stage, in a book, on a podcast. It's going to help you become a powerful speaker or writer. And I will be giving away some of my secrets on how to inspire your audience authentically. So that is next week, and that is the transformative power of storytelling. Woohoo! Sandra D, she's got in. Yay, I'm so glad. It's been nice hanging out with you and seeing you show up on our lives. I'm very excited that I'll get to work with you for 6 weeks. Awesome. And yes, our little dog, Lusa. She's very sad that Stories with Soul won't be here because she usually gets to come to the workshops and snuggle up with everyone as our little therapy dog. So wonderful. Awesome. Well, I'm very glad that we had this time together. Please do look out for the replay links where I will give you access to all of those worksheets that I showed you, the timeline of life events, the hero's journey, so that you can map it out. So if you didn't sign up, if you're just watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, then click the link in the description so that you can get signed up for the official masterclass. And then I can email you. I'm not putting the links out on social media. I will email you the links to my stuff because all of this stuff is copyrighted, you know? All right. So wonderful to see all of you again. I hope that this has been helpful. If you have more questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I love reading email. I will either answer them here live or I'll shoot you a message back. And if you're on WhatsApp, you'll be more likely to get a faster response because then I can just voice message you. All right? So thank you, my dear friends. Thank you so much for being here. I am looking forward to seeing you again next week. And yeah, what else can we get up to in this little world of ours? We can do so much. Until we meet next week, please remember that you are a gift to the world. So share your presence with passion. Much love, everyone. See you.